Welcome to the Sleep Dives channel. We're jumping into pages 211 to 245, and it's a fascinating journey, really. We're going to look at this strange paradox, how trying to master these huge, complex external systems, like a business, ultimately forces us to master the most complicated system of all, ourselves. It's all about how these tools of pure logic lead us right back to the art of personal growth.
So, let's kick things off with a question that I'm sure feels familiar to all of us. You do all the research, you make the perfect plan, and then the results are just not what you expected. Why does that happen? Well, it often comes down to the fact that the systems we live in today, in our work, our economy, even our lives, are just so complex they completely overwhelm our natural intuition. We literally can't juggle all the moving parts in our heads.
There's a name for this, actually. The economist Herbert Simon called it bounded rationality. And it's a simple truth, really. Our minds have limits. The mental maps we draw are often way too simple for the messy reality we're facing. And that's where something like computer simulations can be so powerful. But not as crystal balls, not for predicting the future. No, their real value is in letting us pressure test our own thinking, to see the hidden consequences of our beliefs play out in a totally safe space.
Okay, let's make this real. Let's see how this works in the real world with a brilliant case study. We're heading back to the late 1980s, where Martin Marietta Astronautics was facing a massive crisis on a huge government contract. It was a sink-or-swim moment that forced them to throw out the old rulebook and completely rethink their whole approach to production.
This right here, this was the number that started a revolution. They were projecting a cost overrun of $19 million on one contract. And under the new government rules, they couldn't just pass that cost on. They had to eat it. This wasn't just a little problem they could tweak. This was a full-blown crisis that meant they had to question absolutely everything.
So, the critical shift for them was in how they saw the problem. They moved away from a simple process map, just a straight line of tasks, A, then B, then C, to causal loop thinking. And this is a huge change. Instead of just seeing what happens next, they started to see how everything was influencing everything else. They started to finally see the hidden feedback loops that were secretly driving up their costs and causing all the delays.
And this new way of seeing things led to some really surprising, counterintuitive discoveries. One of their big goals was to dramatically speed everything up. Now, common sense would tell you, well, if you go faster, you're going to make more mistakes. But as John Parker, who is head of manufacturing, points out here, the complete opposite happened. Doubling their speed actually created this wonderful virtuous cycle, and it slashed defects by an unbelievable 75%. Why? Well, because things just didn't have time to sit around in queues getting lost, damaged, or obsolete.
So what was the result of all this new thinking? It's incredible. They didn't just avoid that $19 million loss, they finished the whole project with a $33 million surplus. That's a $52 million swing from where they started. It was such a massive success, it was actually read into the congressional record.
But here's where the story takes its most important turn. This amazing success created a brand new problem. How on earth could they do it again? They realized their victory wasn't just about drawing new diagrams or changing a process, it was about a whole new mindset. And you can't just hand someone a new mindset in a memo, right? They knew that for this change to actually stick, it had to go deeper. It had to become personal.
What they stumbled upon was a fundamental truth. Systems thinking isn't some standalone tool you just pull out of the box. It's woven together with all these other disciplines, like having a shared vision or practicing team learning. But what they found was that no matter which discipline you start with, all roads eventually lead back to one, foundational discipline, personal mastery.
And this is really the core insight of this entire section. You can't truly change the system out there until you're willing to work on the system in here. The point where you have the most leverage, the place where you can make the biggest impact, it isn't a better spreadsheet or a new workflow, it's your own mindset, your own assumptions, your own vision.
So what even is personal mastery? Let's be really clear. This has nothing to do with domination or controlling things. A better way to think about it is like a master craftsperson. It's about getting to such a high level of skill that creating the results you truly want just becomes second nature. It's a way of living that feels less like a constant struggle and more like a creative flow.
Now, the engine that drives all of this is a force called creative tension. And the best way to get your head around it is to imagine a rubber band, okay? You're holding one end, and that represents your vision, what you truly, deeply want to create. The other end is anchored in your current reality, a totally honest, clear-eyed view of where you are right now. That gap between the two creates this natural, powerful tension that just wants to resolve itself.
And it does that by constantly pulling your reality up towards your vision.
So the practice itself is beautifully simple, but it is incredibly powerful. It all comes down to these 3 fundamental steps. First, you're always clarifying and articulating what you really want, your personal vision. Second, you learn to see your current reality exactly as it is. No sugarcoating, no illusions. And third, you make the conscious choice to just hold that creative tension, to let it do its work without giving in to cynicism or despair.
This quote from Robert Fritz, who's a key thinker in this field, just nails it. The real power of having a vision isn't just about having a nice idea to daydream about. Its true power is in its ability to generate that creative tension. A really compelling vision creates the energy, it creates the pull that gets us moving and brings us forward.
All right, so this all sounds great in theory, but how do you actually do it? What does it look like to put this into practice, not just for yourself, but within a team or an organization? Let's get practical.
Trying to foster this in an organization, well, it's a delicate thing. It's called a high-voltage discipline for good reason. It absolutely requires a culture of deep trust, where it's safe for people to be honest about their vision and their reality. And that completely flips the role of a leader. You're no longer the director who has all the answers. You become a coach, helping people to see things for themselves. You move away from carrots and sticks and start trusting that people are driven by something much deeper, their own desire to create.
So how can you start doing this today, right now? It's these 3 steps. First, clarify your vision. Ask yourself, what do I truly want to create? Second, assess your reality. Where am I right now? Be brutally honest with yourself. And third, and this is the hardest bit, you have to commit to holding both of those truths in your mind at the same time. The big temptation is to let that tension go, either by giving up on the vision, saying it's impossible, or by pretending reality is better than it is. You have to resist that. Learning to hold that creative tension, that is the work. That's where all the magic happens.
So, we've gone from the complex problems of a multi-million-dollar missile contract all the way to the very core of personal development. We've seen how the drive to understand and change these big external systems always circles back to the discipline of changing ourselves. The journey has to end with you. So I'll leave you with this to think about. What is the gap between your vision and your reality today? And are you willing to hold that tension